Hello, everyone. Good morning from all over the world. Good morning from New York, but hello to you from wherever you are tuning in. It is great to be here. Welcome to the SSON webinar series. My name is Will Thome. I am one of the senior conference producers at SSON, and I am delighted to be introducing this webinar today on the topic of closing the AP automation gap with Agentic AI, real-world case studies. It's a fantastic and relevant conversation that I am sure is going to provide you all with many amazing insights. And if you're joining us for the first time, I want to just highlight a few important tools in the console before we get started on the session. So at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a couple of icons. First, one is our chat function. If you're having any technical problems, for example, if you can't hear the speakers or can't see slides moving, please use the chat function to message myself or my colleague, Alice, who will be able to respond to your issue in real time. Again, please use this chat feature only if you need to speak to an SSON team member. If you'd like to ask a question to the speakers, you can ask that question using the Q&A tile. It looks like a big square with a question mark in the middle. When you type your questions here, it will move your question to a queue that all of our speakers can see, and we have left time at the end of the session to answer any of your questions. It is also not easy presenting online when people can't see your face and you can't feel the excitement of the audience. So we definitely encourage you to use emojis. There's going to be a tab at the bottom of your screen where you can give some thumbs up or smiley faces or laugh reacts. Please use these to help the speakers know how you feel about the content and the things that they're saying. It is definitely highly encouraged that you use some of these reactions. So please don't be shy. Next, please take part in the polls that'll come up on screen. I believe there's going to be 3 polls today. So make sure that you participate and engage with those so that way we can make this conversation the most fruitful that it can be. And finally, there is a tab for resources. It's got some great additional resources from our speakers, from the sponsors, and from SSO Network. In this tab, you can also find the details for speakers for the session, and you can connect with them on LinkedIn. If this session is also eligible for CPE credits. In order to qualify for the CPE credits, you must be located in North America. You must be viewing this session live. So congratulations, you've already passed one of those hurdles. You must vote in at least 3 of those polls during the webinar, and you must be present for at least 50 minutes of this webinar and answer yes on the post-webinar survey when asked for CPE certificates. If you're interested in being a part of these webinars in the future, please feel free to scan this QR code to become part of our SSON community and to hear more about really exciting updates to the webinar series. But that's it for the housekeeping. I don't want to keep you all here any longer. So I want to hand things over to Sally Fletcher, who's the head of thought leadership and community at Hypatos. She will be your moderator for this insightful discussion and will introduce all of the key speakers for the session. So Sally, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Will. It feels weird being on the webinar from the other side, but I'm excited to represent Hypatus at the webinar. So yeah, welcome everyone so much, and it's great to be back at SSON and speaking to you all over our webinar. You just saw that I launched the first poll, so I would love you guys to answer. And we simply want to know, what's your current level of AP automation? I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to share my slides, and we'll get started. I always encourage you guys in webinars to be as interactive as possible. And we have 2 experts here, and we have Luca, who you've seen speak before, but we also have Tony Chung, who's joining us. And we do have some time reserved at the end for questions. So yeah, make sure that you do post your questions and your comments in that chat at the bottom. Okay, so while I leave that poll up, I'll just quickly introduce our speakers for today. We have Luca van Skyhawk, the Chief Revenue Officer for Hypatus, and Tony Chung, who's a Global VP for Strategic Alliance at XSuite. So So, this topic, as you saw, is focused around closing the AP automation gap with agentic AI. SSON State of the Industry, which most of you will know, it comes out at the beginning of the year. And last month it revealed that even though we've been talking about RPA for 10 years, probably a lot of people will say more, um, most of the market, so 56%, still considers themselves at medium levels of automation. So this is defined, SSON defines this as 25 to 50% automated. And roughly 30% of people had defined themselves as low level, which is really, really surprising. Shared service leaders place a huge importance on leveraging digital solutions as a way to achieve their objectives of becoming a value adding center. And the benefits of automation are incredibly well documented. So I don't need to tell you increased productivity, better compliance, fewer errors, more data analytics. The list goes on and on. So, what's stopping shared service from crossing that Rubicon and going from those medium levels of automation through to STP? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And it will be no surprise to you guys that a lot of it's based around the possibilities of agentic AI. So, Tony here and Luca, we're going to spend some time briefly touching on the challenges, but also how to solve them, looking at some agentic AI use cases, and how it's really an incredible test bed for that. Okay, so let me go ahead and share the results before we get to that. So hopefully you can still see my slides. Luca? Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, the current level of automation, and actually I couldn't have planned that better because it reflects what I just said, thank goodness for that. But 46% of you guys are saying that you're just at the 0 to 20% AP automation level. So there's still quite a way to go. So hopefully we're going to help kind of give you some inspiration to push into the second and to the third bracket here. So let me just close that and I'll get straight into, that's the agenda. I've just shared that with you. So let's get straight into our first question. And my first question is really around that topic. I'm going to direct it to you, Luca. So the current straight-through processing rate sits around 50 to 60% for most AP processes, and it's been that way for a while. There have been lots of attempts to bridge that gap, ERPs, workarounds, chatbots, but not much has worked. What do you see as the reasons for this?
Well, first of all, I also received the poll, but I was not able to select my option here. And I was also thinking, where do we stand at Hypertos, right? 0 to 20, 20 to 50. And I probably I shouldn't say that, but I don't know if you're probably above 76% or not. But the way how our business operates, mostly we are generating invoices through non-purchase order backed processing, right? So it's mainly travels and events and whatever have you. And what we're using here is a virtual credit card mostly. We're using a provider where the team gets the credit cards, they get pre-approved, and then the invoice comes in, we upload it. And still, in those cases, when we upload the invoices, our AP team, I'm pretty sure, is probably reviewing most of the invoices. So there's still this manual touch. Now, looking at, just came to this thought when I saw the poll. So now looking at here on the screen, what we see here. So what's the objective we want to solve in AP automation? We want to get a invoice, a document that is ready or okay to pay with the least number of touches, with a slow cycle time, and of course with least involvement of let's say human labor, and also the lowest risk of getting a penalty payment, late payments, and whatever have you, right? Also low cycle times to manage working capital and whatever have you. And the way how we try to achieve this, getting an okay to pay document in the, let's say, fastest and best way, was through several ways in the past. So either, of course, we can leverage on the procurement side that we have purchase orders, perform a purchase order flip, and perform an automation with maybe an RPA bot, as you said, that leads to a certain automation. In the non-PO cases, you need to have an AI that is processing the invoice, capturing the information from it, assigning GL code, cost center, and so on. So you can actually prepare the booking. And then, of course, you have the, let's say, the email inbound, which is the majority of the companies today that are still using that email and paper scan. But other companies right now are also more going into direction of using, for instance, supplier portals. So where then again we are leveraging mostly purchase order backed invoices, where we can flip them and ask the supplier to upload the invoice and verify it in the ingestion point. So the AP team doesn't have to verify it later on in so many touches. With high frequent transaction businesses, especially EDIs are very relevant. But when you listen to this now, there might not then come up in a company that has an EDI, has a portal, has email, has scan. There's so many different inbound channels that then lead actually to the challenge of duplicate payments, managing those inbound channels, and also a very high challenge of actually getting transparency of the data that is flowing through those different channels. And then after all, we still have all these manual touches still happening, right? And I think that's where we are focusing on right now today. I think the happy path is something that we can get solved already quite easily, even with out of the box technology. The question is, how do you solve this exception path, which is the remaining 20%, or sometimes, if I read the poll, the remaining 80%. So the remaining unhappy path to get this touchless. And I think we will focus on this in a few seconds. But to say one thing right now already, I think one solution can be also to consolidate all these inbound channels to a central ingestion layer. And Agentic AI is supporting this today. Yeah.
Absolutely. That was brilliant, Luca. Thank you. And anything you wanted to add, Tony? I know you guys have a lot of experience in this space.
Yeah, firstly, it's a pleasure joining you guys today to share insights with the audience. And yeah, not just only looking at the automation rate and only really assuming accounts payable are really only focused on data entry. There's a lot of additional manual work that most AP teams are performing, and they're super critical. They rely on every other department in the organization to respond, hopefully in a timely manner, but it's a constant struggle. It's an ineffective collaboration between approvers, warehouse, procurement, just to figure out where the mismatch is or why the invoice details don't look right. But even on the approver side, they're often referring to emails, spreadsheets that they're not familiar with to look at GL codes, cost centers. And it comes down to the lack of visibility of accessing real-time data, and AP teams are often managing accruals, forever battling month-end timelines to get those estimates and chasing other people everywhere in the business, but all the while ensuring local tax compliance. They do this by fixing effectively other people's inaccuracies in the other process steps. And the other challenges are that traditional systems don't manage the user experience very well. They're not very intuitive to use. They don't allow the user to see the invoice electronically whilst looking at the data, and it involves far too many clicks. And as a consequence, they're missing out on real critical business gains, missing out on early payment discounts. There's a landslide erosion of vendor relationship, the vendor satisfaction, maybe any goodwill that's been built up over the years. And then really not to underestimate how all these manual steps and all these factors really drive towards damaging staff morale between departments, resulting in perhaps poor talent retention and not fulfilling that kind of promise of modern way of working that organizations strive to achieve.
Definitely. Yeah, I think a lot of people in our audience will be nodding their head along to those pain points. And this is also taken from SSOM's recent State of the Industry survey, which has just got so much rich data. And the question that they asked was, what are you expecting from your technology investments to our GBS audience? And 30% of people said more touchless. So more of those automated transactions. That really does seem to be kind of the big goal. So let's talk about how to get there and what does that actually look like. So Luca, talk us through this. What's the kind of role of touchless? What does end-to-end actually mean?
Yeah, I was smiling when I just read that. More touchless. It's in every RFP that we're receiving. We want to see those accuracy rates, field level, document level accuracy rates. We want to see a certain document level automation, which is of course it's clear why it's requested because the automation rate translates into later cost avoidance, translates into a business case that you're calculating, and so on. But I think going back to the point that Tony was bringing a second ago, we are, of course, often very focused on the actual invoice processing part when we talk about touchless. And when I say the invoice processing part, it's the extraction, the PO matching, the coding prediction, the text coding. So all the steps that need to be done to get an invoice ready to pay. But there's so many other layers around it that actually also prevent a touchless processing. So two examples here. The one is, of course, vendor submits an invoice and the invoices are not following the invoice submission requirements. Of course, if a PO number that is provided on the document is not active anymore, is not accurate, someone in the old world would have to touch it because it leads to an exception. Now, with the introduction of an AI agent, the AI agent can look into the database. Do I actually know if there's an open purchase order for that supplier? And if not, the agent can now, with natural language, respond back to the supplier and say, hey, watch out, you submitted an invoice that is not compliant with our invoice submission requirements. Please submit it again. And by the way, here's the reason. So this is reducing a touch as well. And this is actually reducing the touch that matters, which is the actual exception handling touch. Right. The other example, very obvious one, is duplicates. I mentioned it before. So why do we receive duplicates today? We receive duplicates because the vendor wants to get paid, and the vendor doesn't have transparency to actually what's happening. They don't trust really. Okay, I'm waiting for 10 days now. I sent now an invoice through EDI and through the portal and through email because I really want to make sure that I get paid. So if you make sure that the vendor gets actually transparency, you provide a portal and they can see here's the status of my invoice and then also can talk to an agent. And it sounds like future, but that's what's happening right now. Talk to an agent, ask the agent, hey, where's my invoice? What's the status of the invoice? And the agent has access to the data and can really communicate back to the vendor. This is increasing vendor satisfaction and is increasing the touchless rate. And of course, we will talk about invoice processing measures that we can also show. But I think this is really important to see this holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to this point, and Tony, I'd love to bring you into the conversation and just talk a little bit about how the human stays in control. We hear a lot of conversation about human in the loop, human on the loop, human off the loop. What's the right balance for AP? Where should the human get involved?
No, and it needs to be stated again, even though the audience is well versed in this. The AI agents are there to support the AP teams and particularly GBS, the process owners. And so here with X Suite, where we really strongly specialize on SAP automation, and our workflow automation performed by X Suite's workflow agent can automatically place an invoice into a waiting step when the three-way matching process automatically identifies that perhaps a missing goods receipt is there. So therefore, not everything is ready to be booked. You can't park the invoice. You can't post it. It's not finished. So you can only park it. The X Suite workflow agent can then monitor that process in the background. And when a certain time frame has gone past, it can automatically escalate the workflow to the correct associated approver to handle that missing GR, or when necessary, back to AP because this has gone on too long and someone needs to take additional action. But the difference being is because everything is in my case, the X Suite invoice monitor, there's total transparency and visibility of all these processes that either are in mid workflow or with other people. And so humans stay in control, even though there are AI agents involved in managing the processes.
Yeah, definitely. A few people have asked me in the chat and in the Q&A about the slides. There is a copy of the slides in the resources tab at the bottom. You just need to click on documents. There's a copy of the slides, and I also put in there a copy of our Agentic GBS blueprint. So you can download that, not to worry. So let's get into the meat of it, the new AP. So really we want to focus in on the top of that pyramid that we talked about, operating on KPIs around this. So Luca, describe us kind of the not really the future, but the reality of agentic AP now. What is this slide telling us?
Yeah. So I think what we're experiencing today is that we can utilize large language models, generative AI, and package them in AI agents to perform certain tasks. So what does this mean? An AI agent is, and that's I think the fascinating part about it, is an entity that can reason and act, right? And through the reasoning, you can also understand actually what it's doing. So it's explaining to you why it's performing a certain action, and you can later audit this action. You can review this action and understand why something was done in one way or the other way. So this reason and act is quite important. And that makes it fascinating and makes it highly performant in terms of automation rate, but also highly auditable. Now, when we look at the slide here for accounts payable invoice processing, it's still exciting and fascinating, but it's a little bit more on the boring side, let's say, because what we want to achieve here is we want to have a predetermined, deterministic workflow of actions that are performed. We don't want to just go in and send the invoice to the agent and ask the agent to figure out with your reasoning what you should do next and then perform the action. Now, here, of course, we want to make sure it's very clear that they run information extraction, get data from the document, run a master data matching, perform some validation rules, perform validation according to business rules. We give it the agents specific tools and database access, like access to historic data to see how human operators were doing certain transactions in the past. So we're really predefining it. So then you could also say, yeah, okay, this type of predefined workflow, that's also how you did it back then with RPA. Where's the difference? And the big difference here is within those workflow steps, you still have agents that reason and act. And they can still say, okay, I see now, I'm looking into this master database and into, let's say, the supplier master or into the purchase order master, and I cannot find the purchase order number. So let me try another approach to find it. Right. And that's where actually the intelligence comes into play in a very kind of isolated environment where this reason and act cannot lead to wrong decisions, let's say. And that's where it makes it very, very performant, because now they don't get stuck when there's an ID missing or the ID is wrong. They continue processing it. That's one thing. And the other thing here is those agents that you see, it's a multi-agent system. They're communicating with each other and collaborating with each other. In a technical term, you say they have a shared state and shared context so they're all aware. If you give them access, they're all aware of what the others are doing. So they can also say, hey, I can't find the supplier master record, but it seems like you didn't capture the information from the invoice correctly. So there's a back and forth communication happening. So yeah, I think behind that, of course, the large language model technology providers, you stack them with agent frameworks, let's say, to make it highly performant and traceable and auditable. And we will see this later in an example. Now, what's very different here when we do invoice processing today with the technology. So for instance, if we go into the typical steps, document comes in, you have to classify is it an invoice or not. Is it maybe just some promotional material? You need to extract information from that invoice, match it with master data, supplier, vendor, payment terms, tax master, perform a PO matching if it's PO backed, coding if it's non-PO backed, and some tax compliance. So what's different here is, for instance, if you look into information extraction, getting the data out of the invoice. Back then, it was always, of course, OCR, plus maybe some rules on top to find where's the invoice number, where's the invoice date. And then it becomes very complex if you want to get line item information, because rules-based, especially if you do it very old times with templates, it's almost a impossible task to achieve because of the different layouts of vendors. Now, when we do the OCR extraction today, we are still using OCR. And those OCR providers like Google, for instance, they are very strong. But what we do on top is we're using large language models that are multimodal, that can read the image of the document, that can see the layout of the document, and add this to the OCR result on top. Right. So then we have like an OCR coming from the large language model plus the OCR coming from whatever, let's say Google. And those two OCR results help us then to actually identify if there's some gaps in the capturing the OCR. And then again, an agent comes, or let's say another large language model comes on top to classify from the OCR the different data points according to a data point schema, which is in this case the invoice schema. So that's how you do it different today. And that's how you get these very high automation rates. So we stopped talking so much about actually capturing and the processing of the invoice, because what we see today when we go live with our customers, our out-of-the-box agents already achieve those, let's say 70, 80, sometimes 90% out-of-the-box results, because the system, once you have set it up in the right way, is super performant. And that's just one example, right? Another one, and then I'm fine with this one here. We can see it live as well. Coding. So for instance, coding, you give an agent access to the chart of accounts and the accounting handbook, and the agent can read through it, can also find in a 300-page chart of accounting guideline the right section, and then make a decision together with the historic posting how to book a general ledger account for an invoice. That's different. Of course, we couldn't do that before large language models existed and agents existed. So these are two examples how this processing today is different and why it's so performant.
Thank you very much, Luca. And a few people have been asking questions about demos and about how it works. So don't worry, we will show you kind of how it works in reality as well very shortly. Tony, I'd love to ask you kind of how X Suite fits into all of this. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of this slide?
Sure, of course. At X Suite, we have over 30 years experience delivering automation solutions for SAP. And so we're renowned for our X Suite sort of best practice approach for SAP. And this is what this diagram sort of represents. And in my role at X Suite, I get approached by enterprise SAP customers, GBS leaders, even ERP partners, who work with accounts payable teams to show them our intelligent finance automation solutions for SAP. And in the case of X Suite Invoice, which is for accounts payable, our customers have the flexibility to process all types of incoming invoices to the business, be it, as you can see here, through e-invoicing, EDI, XML, business partner portals, or even scanning. These are the multitude different input options you have that Luca described earlier. But they get automatically analyzed, processed using AI-powered technologies involving various agents that quickly extract information, not only from the invoice, but most critically, comparing it with your SAP master data to make the information relevant to what SAP requires as the core ERP platform when you do your postings. So as X Suite is deeply integrated with SAP, the starting point for all our AP users is actually natively within SAP GUI or SAP Fury, where they see an invoice monitor with all the new invoices, fully detailed, ready for parking. And once an invoice is parked, it's usually done automatically. But the X Suite best practice workflow is automatically enrolled to validate the invoice at every step, perform all the necessary SAP invoice checks, the three-way, the two-way matching in SAP. And of course, if there's an exception, like the missing GR note, it's automatically routed intelligently to the predetermined agent using SAP Business Workflow. And it's going to them for an approval to say, hey, there's a missing GR. Take a look at this. But through all this, can you look at achieving touchless processing, where all the intelligent checking, the automatic validation, the intelligent matching can automatically park or post the invoice into SAP for you. Whilst all the while, and this diagram, it shows you at the bottom here, all the while at every step of the process, it's very important to know that every attachment in the process, including the PDF of all the workflow steps in the audit trail, are stored securely and compliantly in an archive, in this case via archive link. And this is to ensure proper governance is applied to every invoice process without overloading the SAP database. All these millions and millions of attachments and invoice objects and copies of emails and everything else, you don't want to put that into the SAP database itself. You want to put that into an archive that's linked to the SAP transaction. So our users, when they're in SAP, can easily access and retrieve all the related attachments, even the original XML invoice, and they do this directly from the invoice object in SAP GUI or Fury using the normal attachment list. Now,
I'm just conscious of time. I know that we've got so much to get through, and it's wonderful to see so many questions coming through already. So keep it up, guys. But I know that we wanted to show a quick, short, very, very short demo. It's so short. Tell me when you're ready, Tony.
No, it's fine. You can play it. I mean, this is just to give the people a visual representation of how integrated X Suite is. With SAP, because for those who are familiar with SAP, it actually looks like native SAP itself, but it's actually an X Suite invoice screen. You can see the header detail, you can clearly see the invoice, you can see the lines. But this example is about showing the prediction server where you can see here it's automatically assigned this GL account because of the probability it's defined here. Again, it's based on the historical records. And as part of this step in the workflow, the approver's got to choose the cost center, but he can't remember the cost center, so he goes into the lookup list to look at the cost centers. But here we've enhanced it to actually show the probability offered by the solution. It's 98% certain. It's this code here, code 1000, based on their historical records and what they're familiar with. So again, seamless integration and very convenient for the approver to use.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's really, really powerful. Definitely makes AI feel like a relief rather than an effort, which is obviously what we're all aiming for. Luca, let's come back to you. I'd love, to tell us a bit about how this has been working and some of your case studies in real time.
I mean, it's also no secret. I'm especially excited about the partnership we have with X Suite, and the reason for this is it's for enterprise scenario, high transaction volume cases, and in this case here, of course, SAP ERP cases, where you get a pre-packaged solution, where what we've seen on the very first slide, where you have many different kind of technologies that you stack together, you can get all this in one solution pre-packaged, and that is kind of driving also the speed to implementation and time to value when you go into, let's say, an S/4HANA migration project and you need to add an AP solution on top, or if you just want to roll it out in your existing environment. It's pretty good. I think Tony would probably also make a point on this. But when we talk about the success story here, basically what we did is also we took our pre-packaged out-of-the-box AI agents for accounts payable, and we rolled them out for this global retailer on 78 different geographic markets, multiple different languages, huge impact on their employees because it was just kind of touching so many markets and stores after all. Yeah, so large transaction volume. And when we went live, and back then that was even an older iteration, we went live with a 62% straight-through processing rate. And we roll out the entire organization, all the 78 countries in 12 months, which may sound also long, but if you know how those implementation projects across so many countries with different legislations, taxonomies, and so on can go, this was actually pretty fast. And this wouldn't have been possible without the kind of agentic prepackaged AI agent way that we applied here. Many complexities. So what we did is we applied non-pure coding, text validation, processing of multi-language documents. And what our client here received after all was a central ingestion layer where they also got data intelligence around the kind of errors that are happening, so they can classify them and go in and say, okay, I identify, and that was another benefit of the project. I identify now that the exceptions that we're running into are to, let's say, 5% of the cases. You see here E8, E9, E5 error codes, 5% of the cases because of a mismatch of IBAN and bank account to the vendor master record. So they had quite an issue with their vendor master data, and they were using the system to actually improve that vendor master data, right, through the live usage, because we made it transparent where the challenges are. So that was another benefit we saw here. It was a great collaboration with also with our other partner EY, and one of the success stories for sure.
Fantastic. Right, let me go to the next part. Oh, there's now time for our next poll. So if you want to pop the next poll up, maybe I can even do it myself, or maybe Alice, you might have to do it for me. But just to ask if you guys would be interested in a short session to define your AI use cases. So we'll just leave that open for a while, and then you guys can have a look. Oh, I need to exit off my screen. Brilliant. So yeah, if you guys are interested to learn more, then please do answer the poll and we'll get in touch. Right, so you guys are going to see a little bit of a pattern in this. This data was also taken from our most recent SSON webinar with Hypatus that we hosted back in October or November. And we asked the question, what do you see as the biggest barrier to implementing agentic AI in global business services? So, and the orange, the biggest part of that was data quality access or governance constraints, followed by integration challenges with existing systems, which lots of people were also perceiving as a big challenge. So we really wanted to spend some time today talking about how to overcome those challenges, because of course, some of them are very real, but some of them are not myths, but things that you can definitely overcome with a little bit of help. So I'm going to ask Luca to take us through the first couple. So Luca, tell us about how we overcome that barrier in terms of data and in terms of those governance and auditability concerns that our members are facing.
Yeah, so I think we can probably also go already to the next slide. I can explain it on an example. So to maybe start with data governance, I can show it to you in the demo as well, and it briefly touched in the beginning. So right now, what we see with the agents, they can reason, you can make it transparent what they do, so you really understand every step, and you can also identify this with data insights, dashboards, how they perform certain interactions, why some certain error codes were happening, how the confidence of a processing happens, and so on. So you get all this data. But let's focus for now a second on the actual data quality concerns when we usually are in, let's say, a pursuit with certain prospects. Most of the times they are saying, yeah, but is my data actually ready to handle the agents? They need to get access and they need to process the right transactions, and you're using the history. Can I trust it? And so on and so forth. So what we see is it's actually, you can leverage the capability of the agents during the project to actually manage the quality of your data. So you don't have to now go in and design a perfect process, or you don't have to run a big data cleansing project now before you actually start this AI agent implementation project in your accounts payable invoice processing in this example here. Because what happens is during the implementation, we run a data-driven approach where we then show to you exactly those records that have a low quality, because the agents tell you, hey, I have a low confidence here on this record, you should review it. So you can use them to actually improve the data quality. And that's also part of the success story I just mentioned before. So Sally, if you want to zoom in a little bit on the left side, so does that work? If not, I can do it as part of the demo. So that's the data quality part, and then on the second is context management. So to provide the agents with the right feedback during the implementation, but also later when you see an exception happening, not only going in and solving the exception, but actually telling the agent how it should do it differently for future transactions. So you can have a chat with the agent and tell the agent, hey, here's my feedback, why you did it wrong. For future transactions, you should do it differently. So that's what you see on the right-hand side, and we're also sharing the slide later. But let me show you two quick examples. Sally, I will try to make it short. I know I'm always running a little bit over with the demos.
Yeah, please go ahead and share your slide or share your screen.
Yep. Does it work?
Yes, it does.
Okay, fantastic. So this is the example number one that I just brought up. So what happens here is, since we get access to the supplier master data, since the agents are processing it anyways, also during the implementation, since we optimize them for automation performance, we can also make transparent where the master data quality gaps sit. So here on this dashboards, what we see is the number of validated suppliers, how many actually require a review, where we see duplicate groups, a quality score. What we do is we're integrating also with external data sources like address verification, VAT verification, IBAN verification to identify if the quality of the master data records is actually given or not. And then the agentic part that comes into play here, for instance, in this example, what the is more or less actually the natural language understanding and the capability to decide which data source do I need to integrate into and check. So in this case here, you see the agent nodes, and the agent is telling, hey, I can't find this bank even after checking external sources. In this case here, simple Google search. I can't find this bank. This bank name doesn't exist. So you need to validate and verify what's actually going on. So that's one of those kind of agentic ways to do this validation here. And it's giving us a review score, a confidence score, and so on and so forth. So that's one example of managing the data. The second one for the context management. So let's go into an invoice processing case. So in this case here, very typical invoice. It's an invoice in this case, a Zugfred invoice. It has multiple line items and so on. We're capturing all the information, but what the agent does in the very first step, it's actually identifying, is this a purchase order backed or non-purchase order backed invoice? It is identifying there is a purchase order number, but it's saying, hey, I'm looking into the master database, and I see for this supplier, this number is actually not existing or is not active. So this simple use case, you can now go into the agent conversation. And now talking about auditability and explainability, you can go to the agent conversation. You see here all the agents that are processing this document. And we were now looking into the invoice type evaluator. And then we can see what this agent is actually doing. So you see the input prompt, what it needs to do. Hey, and what is it? An MM invoice? It's a purchase order backed invoice, FI invoice, in the SAP terms, non-purchase order backed invoice. Here's the invoice data, and so on and so forth. So you see the entire prompt, including here the XML that was sent into the Zugfred. And then you see what the agent is actually doing, right? It's then going into the purchase order master, is trying to find it, and it says, hey, I can't find this purchase order because this number doesn't exist. And this is where the agentic AI comes into play. Then it says, well, let me try again. I'm trying with a different way of searching it. And then it is applying certain search filters and so on and so forth. So you can now really see and trace down what the agent is doing and why it then it's coming to its reasoning. So if you think this is wrong now, of course, you can now go also to the prompting and instruct it a little bit differently. So this is, I think, the differentiator, the flexibility in the processing and the full transparency. Yeah.
Ian, thanks, Luca. That was very short.
Yeah. Didn't expect it, huh?
I think it's like the sixth webinar we've done together now. You got it on time. Tony, I'd love to shift over to you and ask about the integration part, because that's the other challenge that we hear time and time again with regards to agentic AI and AI generally. How can you solve that?
Yeah, no, integration in the case of SAP, it's really, really important because, no matter what you're doing intelligently on the outside, if it doesn't park carefully, you're dealing with interface problems. If it can't post because it's not adhering to the business logic inside the ERP system, it could be a vendor block, could be the tax is not valid for that vendor, that country, etc. All this doesn't help, and it creates manual tasks. And XSuite's committed to being certified with SAP. It's a tough process, and we requires annual work to get recertified, and we just got recertified again for S/4HANA. And it gives our customers complete, total peace of mind for their journey with SAP, because although XSuite Invoice, as you saw in the small example, it's deeply integrated into SAP, all the features, functions, tables, they're all reserved in our own namespace. So that means that when SAP do any updates, it's not overwriting or requiring reworking of any of the configurations. And to really achieve touchless processing, you need to work with your ERP platform. At XSuite, we've got a customer success team, and they have an example where they worked with a large hospital group who actually measured to achieve 97% touchless processing as their KPI of invoices through to SAP. And it's not a small amount of invoices. This is 5,000 invoices a day on average, with obviously GRs everywhere. And yeah, so XSuite customers, especially those with GBS teams, really appreciate XSuite's agentic approach, our best practice for SAP with our deployment models, because even I've been personally involved with several enterprise projects who, after working with XSuite, found our best practice as a feature complete foundation to build the new template for them to use in their consolidation of SAP or their transformation to S4. And it allows process owners to really use the SAP certified XSuite as the new standard, but it still has options where they can customize regional business needs through user exits in the right place without affecting the native SAP platform.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I think that's incredibly useful. So I always like to end our webinars on a practical note to give our audience something to basically start thinking about. So before we go to Q&A, and we want to kind of make sure we have 10 minutes for Q&A because the audience have asked some great questions. What's one thing that you can do to move towards touchless AP processing? Luca.
Don't try to solve everything during the implementation project, and use actually the exception routes as input for the training and context for the models. I think that's the way to go, and run a data-driven approach here. Identify the top 20 troublemakers that probably consume 80% of your time and try to solve them, and then go live.
Excellent. And Tony?
I'm almost following Luca's suit here, which is, get started with reviewing your processes, perform some analysis, either internally or maybe bring in some experts, or simply talking to your teams, identify those bottlenecks and where the manual tasks are, that because you don't do the work, you're not really aware of how much manual work there is. Your core team members will not have the capacity or the time to think about the broader process. But I've seen from the GBS projects that I'm involved in, you can start achieving those transformation goals a lot earlier than you anticipate, even with ECC at XSuite. Definitely look at the wider goals, but start sooner. And don't make the mistake in thinking you should wait for the big upgrade project, because when that time comes, you still won't have capacity the next year. So start winning back your capacity for your team now by achieving better automation goals.
Brilliant. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to ask Alice to just run the final poll, just keep that on in the background. And Hypatos have developed a really exciting agentic GBS roadmap, which will help identify use cases, but really help you with a rollout plan and a blueprint for agentic AP and agentic GBS. So if you're interested, scan the QR code or answer the poll, and we'll come back to you with more information. I'll leave that up there while I tackle some of our exciting questions that have come through. So let's have a look. Okay. Okay, Luca, this question's for you. This is from Anonymous. So make sure you put your name on it, guys, because I want to call you out. Agentic AI seems to be focused on the same areas that RPA first solved. Is the true value of AI just RPA on steroids? What are the areas beyond RPA that AI could be of true value?
Yeah, I think I brought probably 2 examples in the beginning, and depending on what you choose, it can be also just an RPA on steroids. But there's several use cases that RPA was not able to solve, especially the ones where you need today natural language understanding, and where you also need to be a little bit more flexible in the decision making. So I brought the example of the accounting handbook and the accounting guidelines, for instance. Another example could be text coding, right? So all the big text engine implementation projects they were a massive effort, and they still led to manual touch points because the simple fact that you need to be able to classify invoice lines into service or good and then into certain service categories so you can apply a tax code, this requires cognitive understanding of what the service or good is about. So an RPA, a rules-based bot who does that with keyword matching, you can build it, but it always breaks. So that's I think one example, and there's many. Like for instance, what I said before, that you can also have a conversation with the agent to understand the data behind, and so on.
Excellent, thank you. Tony, a question that's come through from Dominic is asking, how will Agentic AI deal with the new e-invoicing regulations?
Yeah, so especially in Europe, there's country by country, there are more and more e-regulations that we all have to adhere to. And luckily at XSuite, we do been working with e-invoices for 20 plus years, especially our Nordic colleagues. But now with a more modern approach to it, we have a cloud platform to manage e-invoices. And there, instead of always having to change your configuration and map things when the regulations come out, you have one change in your tenant in our XSuite cloud e-invoicing platform. And that just becomes another input stream that goes into the XSuite invoice process in SAP, and it's totally seamless. There, you still have the validation, you still have the verification, you still have the matching involved, but you run on the back of obviously a PEPL network or those government portals, all applied in a cloud scenario. For enterprise customers, it is actually commonplace and natural to not only have one solution. We find ourselves deeply involved in having multiple input streams going into the workflow, but that's where you have the advantage of it being consistent. At least all the logic and all the validation is applied in the same manner, which is that best practice workflow for SAP.
Brilliant, thank you. Luca, a question that's come through from you from Ryan. I think it's referring to the case study that you showed earlier, is what percentage of your invoices are PO related? So does Hypatos deal with non-PO?
So in this case study, actually, we were focusing only on non-PO. The entire, that was a pure non-PO, and that's very often the major reason why Hypatos comes into play, because the client cannot solve the non-PO part. But most of our customers today, they have a PO, non-PO share, and it really differs based on the business and the vertical. I would say for the average, let's say probably 60% PO and 40% non-PO, but that's really more gut feeling.
Yeah, makes sense. Tony, Sophie is asking, can Agentic AI identify duplicated invoices and fake invoices?
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Especially if you have multiple.
Oh, Tony, I think you muted accidentally.
Sorry. Where you've got multiple input channels coming in, you have to be mindful of duplicate invoices because the vendor sends you it via email. They also submit it via XML because they're on the PEPL network for e-invoicing. It's all fired in. And of course, you do need your agentic AI to prevent duplicate invoice, but also still process one of them as the main invoice identified. And in this case, it would be the e-invoice because of regulatory standards. But yes, you have this as a preventative measure, providing that duplicate check. But then also, when you're looking at that predictive analytics, it's also looking at patterns too, looking for fraud protection. So where you're used to familiarity, where you're getting one invoice a month, but then there's an irregular timed one, it can be flagged for somebody to pay attention to it, just to really check if it was a valid invoice, because we have to be very careful with fraudulent performance to our GBS teams.
Yeah, definitely. Those security measures and governance are absolutely crucial. Luca, Praveen Kumar is asking, how does Hypatos handle different types of invoice layouts or formats?
Yeah, so this question might also come from the time where we had to train and prepare those formats really with layouting and explaining on a rules-based level where the OCR has to find an invoice number for this type of vendor and so on and so forth. So this is over. We're not doing that anymore. The way how we handle the different invoice layouts, our models with the pre-trained knowledge and the prompting and the context we give it, they can handle most or any invoice layout. It doesn't actually matter. You can upload a completely new supplier invoice to the system, and it will, with 90% certainty, capture most of the data points correctly. That's why we also say this problem from our point of view is a solved problem. The problem is more actually how to handle all the different exception routes in the business, the different business rules that lead to different handling of the processing of an invoice. But the capturing of different layouts, it's not a topic anymore. But maybe to also answer a little bit more on a technical level, the way I explained in the beginning that we're using also large language models with multimodal capabilities. So we are uploading the image to the large language model, and it sees the structure of the document, and it can, based on this structure, then identify the data points. So we don't have to teach it how to do it. It actually already is able to do it based on deriving it from the invoice image by looking at it like, let's say, like a human would look at it.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we've got time for maybe 3 more quick questions. But guys, if you do have lots of questions, put them in the chat in the Q&A, and I'm sure that Hypatus and Tony from Expert will come back to you by email with more detailed explanation, because some of them are a little bit more technical. But yes, we will jump into a few more now. Next question comes through from Sophie. Lucas, Sophie's asking, post-implementation, how long does the Hypatus take? How long does it take for the AI agents to perform their tasks smoothly post-implementation?
So post-implementation, they already perform them smoothly.
Okay, good.
No, so that's maybe also a little bit different to how vendors, so other vendors might do it. But usually we say we go live at a certain, let's say, automation rate that is acceptable. And that is, again, it's usually 70, 80%. In some situation, it's 90. And then post-implementation, though, you see a phase of 3, sometimes 4, 5 months. Also depend, and that's really, really important. Come to that in a second. But this period where you then go up to 90%. The actual blocker in this period is, again, is actually not the performance of the system, but you actually need to understand why are you now processing this vendor so differently to all the other 10,000 vendors? So and this vendor is representative of 10,000 of your transactions. So we need to solve that case by case. But now I think the beauty of it is, don't go in now and try to really build templates case by case, but you can now go to the agent and tell the agent, okay, for those type of cases, you need to process the invoice differently. So you can still do it systematically, and you can use data in, you can use analytics and insights to identify where are the error cases, and then go in very structured. And that's why you can compress the time to get 90, 95% significantly. Yeah. And I think what I want to make another important point is you will compress this time even further if you start owning the system, because you're the one or the customers are the ones who know their processes and business rules the best. So when you start owning it and you start prompting the AI and have maybe a team, let's say a center of excellence, who is doing that, who is administering the application, that's where we see our customers being most successful in reducing this time frame.
I mean, I can concur on that point as well, because the successful projects that I am fortunate to oversee, the customers are actually taking on the rollouts themselves and taking on the templates to roll out to the regions. They understand the rule set. They know they have to amend it slightly for this region because they work slightly differently, but because they understand the rule set, it's not just a simple header comparison to an amount in the purchase order. It is actually on a line level intelligence there. And of course, for the rules, you want to make that available so that the business can actually drive the change as the business changes, and not always coming back to somebody like us to redesign or redevelop it.
And it's leading also to employee satisfaction a lot, right? I mean, it's almost every project where they are saying, when can I get access to the agents and start working with them? And it's because it's such a more pleasurable work than just going in document by document by document and reviewing line item. So you can instruct now the agent to do the work. And I think it's definitely also driving retention of employees and satisfaction for sure.
Brilliant. Sadly, that's all we've got time for. I'm going to hand back to Will to say goodbye. But thank you so much to Luca and to Tony and to everyone that had questions. Don't worry, we will reply to them and we'll reply by email to you and give you some more details. Back to you, Will.
Thanks so much, Sally. Just to echo Sally's words, thank you all so much. Thank you so much to Hypatos, to Tony, Luca, Sally for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. I know there were a ton of questions, so there's going to be a lot of responding. Everyone's questions will be addressed. So thank you all so much for your participation. I see a lot of love in the emojis. So thank you all so, so much. I know you enjoyed it just as much as I did. But this has been an SSON webinar. I thank you all very much for tuning in, and we hope that you will join us again next time. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.